Signs your alternator is bad versus those of a bad battery. Your car won't start. You turn the key or push the start button, and instead of that familiar engine rumble, you hear a sad little click, maybe a slow crank, or nothing at all. And in that moment, what's the first thing that pops into your head? My battery's dead. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people stop right there. They run to the store, spend over $100 on a new battery, drop it in, feel like a hero for a few hours, and then the very next day, they're back to square one. Same problem, same no-start situation. Why? Because the battery wasn't the problem in the first place. Sometimes it's not the battery at all, it's actually your alternator. And if you've never thought about it, the alternator is the part that keeps the battery alive. If that's failing, you could swap in 10 brand new batteries and still be stranded on the side of the road. That's what this video is all about. Before you spend hundreds of dollars replacing the wrong part, I'm going to show you how to tell the difference between a weak battery and a bad alternator. We'll cover the symptoms, the quick driveway tests you can do yourself, and the little-known mistakes people make that cost them big money. And stick with me until the end, because I'm going to share one simple test almost nobody does. And skipping it is one of the most common and expensive reasons people keep killing battery after battery. So let's get into it. Why is this important? Because batteries and alternators often fail with nearly identical symptoms: dim lights, electrical issues, or a car that won't start, causing many drivers to waste money on the wrong fix. I've seen people replace battery after battery only to find out the alternator wasn't charging them, and others spend $600, $800 on an alternator when all they needed was a simple new battery. Misdiagnosis drains your wallet, leaves you stranded, and in some cases can even take out both parts. The good news is, by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to tell the difference, recognize the signs, and test each one the right way. What does each part actually do? Before we get into each failure and its signs, let's quickly clear up what each part is supposed to do when it's working right. Because once you understand what an alternator does versus what a car battery does, all the symptoms will make way more sense. Starting with the battery. Think of the battery as the sprinter on your track team. It provides the initial burst of energy your car needs to come alive. When you turn the key, the battery sends electricity straight to the starter motor, which cranks the engine. Without that stored power, the engine isn't turning over. But that's not all. The battery also powers all the accessories when the engine is off. So if you're sitting in the car listening to the radio, charging your phone, or even just leaving the dome light on, that's all coming straight from the battery's stored electricity. Here's the key thing to remember. The battery is a storage device. It doesn't make electricity, it only stores it. Which brings us to the alternator. If the battery is the sprinter, the alternator is the marathon runner. It kicks in once the engine is running, and its job is to generate electricity. It does that by spinning with the engine's drive belt, turning mechanical energy into electrical energy. That electricity does two things at the same time. It keeps your car's electronics alive: headlights, AC blower, heated seats, infotainment, you name it. It constantly recharges the battery so it stays ready for the next time you need to start the car. The battery gets you started, but the alternator keeps you going. If the alternator stops doing its job, the battery alone can only keep the car running for a short time before it drains. And if the battery itself is weak, even a perfectly good alternator can't save you, because there's nothing to hold the charge in the first place. Now that we've got that straight, let's take a look at what happens when they don't work the way they should. Because trust me, the symptoms tell a very different story depending on which one is failing. Signs your alternator is bad versus a bad battery. Starting with the signs of a failing battery. The battery's main job is to store energy and deliver that first big punch to start your car. When it's weak, the problems usually show up during startup or when the engine is completely off. The first sign? That slow crank or clicking sound when you turn the key. You've probably heard it before. Instead of a strong, confident engine turnover, you get this sad or even just a rapid series of clicks. That's the battery struggling to deliver enough power to the starter. Sometimes it catches and fires up, but other times it just gives up. Another classic sign? The car starts after a jump, but dies again later. This one trips up a lot of drivers. They assume, well, the jump worked, so it must be the battery. Not necessarily. What actually happened is you borrowed power from another car's battery just to get started. If your alternator is healthy, it should keep the engine running and recharge the battery. But if the alternator's weak, that new burst of energy gets drained immediately and you're right back to a dead car. So yes, a dead battery can cause this, but it's also one of those overlap symptoms we'll sort out in a minute. Third sign. Headlights dim noticeably with the engine off, but brighten when the engine is running. Here's what's happening. With the engine off, the battery is the only power source. If it's weak, the headlights look dull, almost yellowish. But the second you start the car and the alternator kicks in, boom, the lights brighten up. That contrast is a strong hint that your battery isn't holding enough charge on its own. Next, let's talk about the physical condition of the battery itself. If you pop the hood and see white or bluish-green crust around the battery terminals, that's corrosion. It builds up over time and restricts the flow of electricity, which can mimic the symptoms of a weak battery. Sometimes you can clean it and buy yourself a little more time, but heavy corrosion often points to an older battery that's reaching the end of its life. Another visual clue? A swollen battery case. Heat and overcharging can cause the sides of the battery to bulge out, and once that happens, it's done. Replace it. And finally, the simplest but most overlooked sign: age. Most car batteries last only 3 to 5 years depending on your climate and driving habits. If yours is pushing that range, it's living on borrowed time. Drivers often ignore this until one cold morning when the car just refuses to start. Don't wait for that surprise. If your battery is 4 years old or more, consider testing it regularly or replacing it proactively. Now let's talk about the alternator. Unlike the battery, the alternator's symptoms usually appear while the engine is running, because that's when it's supposed to be powering everything. First sign: lights that flicker, dim, or get brighter when you rev the engine. This one's almost a dead giveaway. If your headlights or dash lights are acting like a haunted house, flickering on and off, or changing brightness as you hit the gas, that's the alternator struggling to regulate voltage. A healthy alternator keeps things steady. A failing one can't. Next, a dead battery soon after replacement. This is the one that burns people the most. They proudly install a brand new battery only to have it drained within a week. If your new battery keeps dying, it's almost always because the alternator isn't recharging it. Think of it like filling a leaky water bucket. No matter how new the bucket is, if the faucet isn't running, you're going to run dry fast. Another clue: electrical accessories cutting out while driving. Ever had your radio suddenly shut off? Power windows moving more slowly than usual? AC fan cutting out on its own? Those are strong hints that the alternator isn't keeping up. Since modern cars run almost everything on electricity, when the alternator can't provide enough juice, systems start shutting down one by one. Then there's the grinding or whining noise from the engine bay. That's not the alternator's electricity, that's its bearings. Inside the alternator is a rotor that spins at high speed. If the bearings go bad, you'll hear it. A grinding, whining, or sometimes even a squealing sound can all point to alternator trouble. Fifth sign: the battery light or charging system warning on the dashboard. Ironically, that little battery symbol on your dash doesn't always mean the battery is bad. In fact, 9 times out of 10, it's telling you the charging system, which includes the alternator, isn't working right. If that light flicks on while you're driving, take it seriously. And finally, a burning smell from the belt or alternator area. This happens when the alternator is overheating or when the belt driving it is slipping. The smell is usually a hot rubber or electrical burning scent. Either way, it's a warning that your alternator isn't long for this world. So the rule of thumb is this: alternator issues show up while the car is running. Flickering lights, failing electronics, weird noises, dash warnings, or that burning smell, those are all alternator red flags. How to tell the difference? Okay, now for the million-dollar question: how do you tell if it's the battery or the alternator? Here's the breakdown, starting with some easy driveway tests. Jump test. If your car starts with a jump but dies shortly after, that points to the alternator. Why? Because the jump gave your battery temporary power, but the alternator couldn't keep the car alive. A healthy alternator would have taken over once the engine was running. Battery-only test. Fully charge your battery and let it sit overnight without driving. In the morning, check the voltage or try to start the car. If it's flat again, the battery can't hold a charge and needs to be replaced. Simple as that. Multimeter test. This one's my favorite because it's fast, cheap, and dead accurate. Grab a multimeter and check your battery's voltage with the engine off. It should read around 12.6 volts for a healthy, fully charged battery. Now start the car and check again. If the alternator is working, you should see the number jump to between 13.8 and 14.4 volts. That increase means the alternator is charging. If the number doesn't rise, or worse, if it drops, you've got an alternator problem. Accessory load test. Turn on your headlights, AC, radio, and any other accessories while the car's running. If the alternator is weak, you'll notice lights dimming or systems cutting out. If everything stays steady, your alternator is doing its job. So here's the simplest way to remember it. Batteries fail in silence when the car is off. Alternators fail in action when the car is running. Cost difference and why diagnosis matters. Alright, now here's where things really hit home. The cost. If your problem is just the battery, you're looking at about $100 to $250 for a new one in most cars. Even if you get an AGM or premium battery, you're rarely spending more than a couple of $100. Pretty manageable. But if it's the alternator, that's a different story. Replacing an alternator can run anywhere from $400 to $900 in most cars, and if you drive a luxury brand or something with a cramped engine bay, way, you could easily see the bill climb over $100 to $200. And here's the painful part. If you misdiagnose the issue, you could pay for both. Imagine replacing the battery thinking it's the fix, only to have the new one drained by a bad alternator. Or worse, replacing the alternator when it was really just a week-old battery. That's when people end up doubling their repair bill. That's why these simple tests we just went through matter so much. Spending 5 minutes with a multimeter could literally save you hundreds of dollars. So before you throw parts at the problem, test first. Because a little patience here keeps your wallet a whole lot fatter. FAQs. Now let's look at a few quick-fire FAQs, because these are questions people ask me all the time. Can a bad alternator damage the battery? Yes. In fact, it's one of the most common ways batteries die early. A weak alternator undercharges the battery, leaving it constantly drained. Or worse, a failing alternator can overcharge and cook the battery. Either way, you end up needing a new battery too. Can a fluid change fix alternator or battery problems? Nope, that's more for transmissions or power steering. Neither your battery nor your alternator uses service fluid. The only maintenance here is keeping the battery terminals clean and the alternator belt in good shape. Could both the alternator and battery fail at once? Yes, it's possible, but usually it's a domino effect. The alternator goes bad first, which then kills the battery. So if you replace one and the other is also dead, that's probably what happened. Is a shutter or flickering always the alternator? Not always. Sometimes bad grounds, corroded battery cables, or even loose accessory belts can cause similar symptoms. That's why testing with a multimeter is so important. Can I test this stuff myself at home? Absolutely. A multimeter is less than $30, and with just 2 tests, battery off, then battery running, you'll have your answer. There's also what's called a stall test, where you purposely load the alternator to see if it keeps up. But I don't usually recommend that unless you really know what you're doing. You can fry components if you push them too hard. Do bad alternators or batteries always trigger a warning light or code? Not always. That's what makes this tricky. A dying battery doesn't set a check engine light, and alternators sometimes fail gradually, throwing voltage all over the place without triggering a clear warning. By the time the dashboard light comes on, the problem's usually gotten pretty bad. So don't wait for the light. If your car's showing any of the symptoms we talked about, test it now. By now, you know how to spot the signs of a bad battery, how to catch alternator failure early, and most importantly, how to tell the difference between the two before spending a dime. If this video saved you from guessing and wasting money, do me a favor. Drop a battery versus alternator down in the comments so I know you're getting value out of these diagnosis breakdowns. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.